Anthony J. Dutcher was born on May 22, 1985, in Colorado Springs, USA. He was a dynamic individual with a wide range of interests. He managed to find time for many activities, including studying various musical instruments, languages, and martial arts. He also had a love for nature and enjoyed hiking. Anthony was capable of venturing into the forest alone for a few nights and surviving without assistance. He aspired to combine his passion for languages with his interest in martial arts, dreaming of a future as a translator, serving in the military, or pursuing a related career. Those who knew him described him as friendly, sociable, family-oriented, and ambitious. Anthony always made time for his loved ones, including his grandparents, Carl and Joanna, who lived in the small, close-knit community of Guffey, Colorado, which had a population of about 100 people. In Guffey, everyone knew each other, and the atmosphere was always peaceful and quiet. It was located an hour-and-a-half drive from Colorado Springs. Anthony loved visiting his grandparents because they lived in a peaceful, natural setting where he could explore the outdoors. Their tiny town had only a few dozen houses spread across the Great Plains. His grandfather, Carl Dutcher, was born in 1940. He served in the Army for 20 years before becoming a machinist, and for the last 13 years of his career, he worked in government positions, achieving significant success. His wife, Joanna, was born in 1942, had a diverse career as a cosmetologist, nurse, and store salesperson. Carl and Joanna had known each other since childhood, grew up together from the age of 7, fell in love, and married in 1964. Since then, they have been inseparable. They had 3 sons. After retiring, they moved to Guffey to enjoy their later years peacefully. There, they established a farm, started agricultural activities, and raised animals. Joanna was very sociable and active, while Carl preferred to stay at home and garden. He enjoyed working on their land. When Anthony visited, they purchased a small plot below the farm where Anthony built a hut. This hut was on a hill, offering a beautiful view of the surrounding area, including the family farm. Anthony and his grandfather constructed the hut several years ago. By the time Anthony turned 15, he began visiting more often, much to his grandparents' delight. They shared many interests, which helped them develop a close bond. On New Year's Eve, December 31, 2000, Anthony was 15 years old. He was going to celebrate the holiday with his grandparents. Since his parents were going out, his grandparents happily agreed to take care of him. The Dutchers dropped Anthony off at his grandparents' house on the morning of December 31st, where preparations for the evening's festivities were already underway. Later, Anthony's friend Isaac Grimes, who was also 15, planned to join them. The boys had been best friends for a long time and were set to go on a holiday camping trip to Anthony's cabin. Shortly before midnight, Anthony's mother called him. They exchanged greetings, both feeling anxious that the phone lines might be busy when midnight struck. They chatted for a while and agreed to reach out to each other on the morning of January 1st, after everyone had woken up. Anthony promised to call as soon as he got up, as he usually wakes up early. However, when his mother woke up in the morning, she did not receive the promised call or even a message, which she found odd. Anthony usually sent a congratulatory message that would arrive at night in case the lines were overloaded, but that didn't arrive either. At first, she didn't worry, thinking it was a night of celebration and rest. She also knew that the boys had planned to go to a remote hut where the connection might be weak. However, when neither the grandparents called nor responded, her concern began to grow. She decided to reach out to her relatives to understand what was happening, but none of them picked up her calls. Anthony's mother, Jennifer, tried multiple times to contact at least one family member, but no one answered until January 3, 2001. At that point, she could no longer dismiss her worries with excuses about camping or the holiday, so she called the police to request a welfare check on her relatives. Law enforcement responded quickly. When they arrived, they discovered a chaotic scene. An exterior examination showed signs of forced entry. Someone had broken into the house through the back door. Inside, everything was in disarray, and many items were damaged. When the patrol arrived at the kitchen, they discovered Carl Dutcher unresponsive on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. He had been shot twice in the chest. Concerned that the shooter might still be nearby, the officers drew their service weapons. There was no gun found beside the body, indicating that a crime had likely taken place. As they entered the hallway, they discovered a woman's body on the floor next to a broken toilet in the bathroom. It was Joanna. She was lifeless, lying in a large pool of blood. She had been shot 6 times, making it clear that her death was a murder, not an accident. The family was particularly concerned because Anthony was missing from the house. The police cordoned off the farm and initiated an investigation, focusing on locating Anthony first, as he might need help. Jennifer confirmed that he should have been with his grandparents at that time and couldn't have left for home alone without informing anyone. Anthony was declared missing, and a search was launched. The Dutcher family was devastated by the events and chose to travel to Guffey to help search for Anthony. Jennifer informed the police that her son planned to spend the night at a cabin in the forest, but she couldn't explain its exact location over the phone. The forensic still experts continued to investigate the site of the attack. It appeared to be a sudden and unprovoked assault. Carl seemed to have walked into the kitchen and was shot without any warning. He didn't have time to defend himself and showed no signs of struggle. Joanna, on the other hand, might have had slightly more time to react. The assailants attacked her, forcefully hitting her head against the edge of the toilet before shooting her. She likely tried to protect herself, as one of her hands was shot through. The bullet struck her head after entering through her palm, leading to her immediate death. She was presumably the second victim of the attackers and may have attempted to escape to the bathroom for safety, but it was futile. Members of the Dutcher family who arrived in Guffey, they reported that Carl had a strong interest in firearms. He owned a variety of guns, including different models of pistols and rifles, which he restored and sold as a hobby. At the time of the crime, there were several dozen firearms in his house. It was crucial to determine what might have been stolen. The son of Carl, Charles, assisted in this investigation, he sharing his father's passion for guns and having a rough idea of what was in their collection. This was an important lead, as the firearms were not stored openly but rather in a locked gun cabinet. For someone to find, open, and steal a gun, they would need to act with intention, suggesting that the criminal was familiar with both the victims and the location of the gun cabinet. Detectives started to entertain the theory that Anthony, the missing grandson, might be the killer. They were unsure about his fate. It was theorized that he could have taken a weapon and harmed his family before fleeing. However, Anthony's parents firmly rejected this idea. They emphasized that he loved his grandparents deeply and had great relationships with all his relatives. Furthermore, he did not have any mental health issues and had never run away. Overall, there were no known problems with him. Anthony's parents guided the police to the campsite in the woods where Anthony intended to spend the holiday with his best friend Isaac Grimes, in a cabin. Jennifer was hopeful of finding her son alive, believing he might be hiding there to escape any danger. The campsite was located about 500 meters from their home, situated on a hill obscured by thick vegetation. Several armed police officers, along with her, made their way to the site. When the police entered the scene, they quickly spotted a sleeping bag with someone inside and another empty bag nearby. There were also board games scattered around, suggesting they had started playing. Unfortunately, Jennifer's hopes were shattered. Anthony was present, but tragically, he had been murdered. His throat was deeply slit, nearly decapitating him. The attack was brutal, leaving him without a chance to defend himself. It appeared he was caught off guard and killed in cold blood, and the single, powerful blow indicated that the killer was experienced. Detectives found this particularly troubling. The precision and force suggested it was not the killer's first murder. Despite their efforts, the police could not locate the weapon used in the stabbing. The parents were thoroughly interviewed, sharing everything they knew about Anthony's belongings. It seemed the attacker had taken some valuables, which could assist in the investigation. Notably missing was a watch given to Anthony by his grandparents for the holiday. It was a significant, adorned with a blue flame design. On that day, another 15-year-old boy, named Isaac Grimes, had been at the campsite. This accounted for an extra sleeping bag and game setup in Anthony's cabin. It was clear that at least 2 people were present, but the other sleeping bag was empty. The police were now looking for another potential victim. They first decided to visit Isaac's home since he lived nearby. To their surprise, they found him there. 15-year-old Isaac Grimes opened the door calmly. He was alive and seemed unharmed. Isaac explained to investigators that he had initially planned to go to his relatives with Anthony on New Year's Eve to set up a tent camp. However, at the last minute, he decided to cancel his plans with Anthony because other friends invited him to a party in Colorado Springs. The party was organized by high school students, and Isaac chose to attend. He stated that he never reached the Dutcher's house, had not seen his best friend, and was unaware of what happened to him. Isaac was deeply saddened by the news of Anthony and his grandparents' deaths, but there was something troubling about how he was acting. Unfortunately, Anthony's mother wasn't certain if Isaac had visited Anthony that evening. They hadn't talked about it during her conversation with her son, but she did know that Isaac had been to the cabin with Anthony earlier. Anthony had taken him to his secret spot, which was meant to be kept private from everyone else. The detectives decided to confirm Isaac's statement by finding out who he attended the party with that night. Reluctantly, he provided the names of 2 classmates, Jonathan Matheny, who is 17, and Glenn Urban, who is 18. The police reached out to both boys, and while they were willing to talk, their accounts were surprisingly similar. It seemed as if they had rehearsed their stories, using the same phrases and wording, which is unusual during interrogations. However, this similarity alone was not sufficient to charge them. The police needed evidence linking them to the crime scene. Regardless, Jonathan and Glenn, along with Anthony's best friend, Isaac, remained under suspicion. It was unclear whose sleeping bag was found next to Anthony's body in his cabin. Following this, the autopsy report was released, showing that all the victims, Carl, Joanna, and Anthony, had died on New Year's Eve. This strongly suggested that the killer had targeted the family specifically, as he knew where to find each of them. The attacker must have been familiar with the Dutcher family, since very few people knew about Anthony's secret cabin or Grandpa's gun cabinet. This theory was further supported by the fact that Carl's house had weapons. He had a habit of always carrying a gun with him before opening the door and typically kept it near the entrance. For an American living in a remote area, having a gun can be crucial for self-defense. This practice was so common that the grandfather would even greet his children and grandchildren while holding a gun. However, Carl unprepared when the attack occurred. The assailant or assailants were careful and left no evidence in the house. It was believed that Anthony was the first victim and was likely killed by a single attacker. The house assault might have been carried out by another individual, as suggested by the different behavior, style, and weapon used in the attack. Nonetheless, these theories could not be confirmed. The investigation lasted for 2 months. No useful evidence had been discovered. Then, on March 6, 2001, Isaac came to the police station, terrified for his life. He shared a bizarre story about being chased by a man with a shotgun who had killed his best friend's family. Initially, this seemed like paranoia, possibly the result of the boy being deeply affected by the recent murders of 3 people. However, given this new information, the detectives began to suspect something more and decided to re-examine the events from New Year's Eve. One of the investigators recalled the watch mentioned by Anthonia's parents. When they met with Isaac, they asked him about it. He claimed he had seen the watch on his friend, which was the biggest contradiction in the investigation. The watch had only been given on New Year's Eve, so Isaac couldn't have seen it unless their meeting occurred just before midnight. This conflicted with Isaac's earlier statements. It became evident that Isaac had been in the house and knew more than he let on. It appeared that the investigation was making progress. On March 8, 2001, Isaac Grimes and his parents were called in for an official questioning. He maintained that he had not been at his friend's house on the night of the incident. The police then shifted their focus to the watch, effectively exposing Isaac's lies in front of his family. This investigation led to the discovery of an army jacket with blood stains in the victim's house. Eventually, Isaac succumbed to the pressure of his conflicting statements and confessed. Isaac shared the truth about what occurred on New Year's Eve. He explained that just before midnight, his classmate Jonathan Matheny brought he over to Anthony's house. The boys greeted each other, exchanged holiday wishes, and then went to a campsite together. There, they spent time as friends, played games, and shared stories. Anthony was unaware that his best friend had hidden a knife. As they were about to go to bed, Isaac distracted Anthony by pointing out a light in the window. When Anthony looked away, Isaac approached him from behind, drew a knife, and stabbed Anthony in the throat with great force, resulting in a fatal injury. The medical examiner was later shocked to discover that a 15-year-old boy could inflict such a deep wound with a single strike. Isaac acknowledged that he had applied all his strength in the attack. Jonathan Matheny arrived at the Dutcher farm around 4 a.m. with a rifle. He waited at a distance for Isaac to return, and then they both entered the house to confront the elderly couple, breaking down the back door. The noise disturbed the homeowners. Joanna and Carl got up, and Carl went to the kitchen to see what had happened, likely intending to scare off the intruders, unaware they were there to kill them. Jonathan shot Carl first while Isaac just watched. Carl fell to the ground after a couple of shots. Terrified, Joanna fled to the bathroom and locked the door, hoping to hide, but Jonathan had no intention of leaving any witnesses. He forced open the bathroom door, struck Joanna's head against the toilet, and then shot her. It's important to note that both perpetrators were still in school. Jonathan was 17 and Isaac was only 15. Isaac later stated that he simply followed his older friend and watched as he committed these crimes. The criminals knew about the weapons Carl owned and took several with them. They loaded the weapons into a car trunk and drove to the house of Glenn Urban, 18-year-old. They gave him a knife and a rifle that had been used to attack two people, instructing him to get rid of the weapons, making him an accomplice. The police could not determine the motive behind the crime, and Isaac refused to speak. The source of the rifle was also unknown. 17-year-old Jonathan Matheny was arrested right after he confessed, but he claimed he was not involved in the triple murder. Then Glenn Urban was taken into custody. He initially denied any involvement but eventually confessed. Glenn revealed that he had been instructed to dispose of the weapons and provided important information. He alleged that another teenager, Simon Sue, who was 18 at the time, played a key role in the crime. Glenn stated that Simon was the one who planned the massacre, chose the targets, directed the operation, and devised a way to cover up the evidence. At Simon's urging, Glenn was instructed to destroy the weapon. He took it apart and disposed of the pieces in various locations. During the investigation, the detectives learned about Simon for the first time and decided to question the other two people involved in the crime. However, those still individuals refused to speak. It was revealed that Simon had a lonely and unloved childhood, with very little social interaction during his school years. He met Isaac, Glenn, and Jonathan while in high school. Isaac and Simon became friends through their shared interests in chess and video games. All three of them were socially awkward and had few friends, wishing desperately to be more popular. Over time, Simon gained influence over the group, promising them a more exciting life. He claimed to be part of a secret organization and said he had connections with a rebel army in Guyana. This behavior was similar to recruitment methods used to attract socially isolated schoolchildren who want to belong to something bigger. It soon became clear that Simon had deceived them all. When they became part of this organization, they underwent intense training that included using firearms and throat-cutting techniques. Simon assigned progressively tougher and more brutal tasks. It got to the point where he compelled them to eat and drink to the point of exhaustion, referring to this torment as a test of their willpower. In the end, he manipulated the teenagers so thoroughly that they couldn't picture their lives outside of this organization in completing Simon's demands. Simon ran the club like a military unit, assigning each member a military rank to inspire them to serve him better. He forced the boys to give him a portion of their money and punished them harshly for disobedience. One of the ongoing activities was watching disturbing videos of real animal and human killings. When Isaac voiced his concerns and showed signs that he felt something was wrong, Simon labeled him a traitor. He threatened Isaac with violence and demanded that he prove his loyalty to the group, all while being pressured by two older boys. Isaac was given the task of killing his best friend, Anthony, to to prove his loyalty to the team. Jonathan was tasked with getting rid of Anthony's grandparents. Both were supposed to retrieve several weapons from Carl's house. Since they lived nearby, they were aware of his interest in weapon restoration and knew about his gun cabinet. It was not difficult to find out the location thanks to Anthony. But why was the Dutcher family chosen as the victims? The motive for the triple murder of these individuals remained a mystery. According to sources, Carl may have made some unpleasant remark about Simon, which could have provoked hatred. However, there was no confirmation of this. All the students claimed that Simon set them against Carl because the real motive might have been the presence of firearms, which Simon wanted to acquire. When the police raided Simon Sue's house with a warrant, they quickly found evidence that corroborated what the other teenagers had said. Specifically, they discovered several items stolen from Carl. It appeared that real preparations for another crime were underway. The manipulator was found to have several dozen firearms, all of which had been stolen during various assaults. However, prior to the tragedy at Carl Farm, these assaults had not been violent. There were at least 30 pistols and rifles in the house, which now needed to be examined. Despite being 18 years old, the leader of the gang had his own warehouse, containing even more weapons, spare parts in various stages of disassembly, and ammunition. There was a whole arsenal stored there, including an AK-47. According to the police, it could arm a small infantry unit. Simon was taken in for questioning. Despite being a quiet and unloved young man, he turned out to be very cunning and cynical. He refused to admit guilt, claiming that Glenn, Isaac, and Jonathan were the real criminals who wanted to make him the scapegoat. According to Simon, he was in Canada at the time of the attack and had nothing to do with what happened. Of course, the leader of the gang lied. He denied forcing his friends to engage in various extreme activities and described the club they allegedly belonged to as merely an entertainment community. He immediately began to proclaim that all three accomplices had mental and behavioral issues, labeling all of them as aggressive. It was clear he had prepared extensively in case he was caught. Ultimately, it was decided to try all the criminals as adults for the triple murder. Isaac Grimes pleaded guilty to the murder of Anthony Dutcher, his best friend. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Jonathan Matheny and Simon Sue were charged with organizing criminal activity, planning murder, and illegal possession of weapons. Jonathan Matheny was also charged with double murder. In the end, Jonathan sentenced to 68 years in prison, while the ringleader, Simon Sue, was sentenced to 53 years in prison. For aiding the criminal group and disposing of the instrument of the crime, Glenn Urban was sentenced to only 2 years in prison. It was proven that he did not plan or commit the crime, though he was fully aware of his friend's plans and did not help prevent the atrocities. Isaac's mother still cannot believe that her son committed such a horrific crime. She struggles to understand how her sweet, kind son, Isaac, turned into a real monster under the influence of a dangerous manipulator. Isaac himself explains his participation in the murder by stating that he was intimidated and threatened. He was warned that if he did not obey and fulfill his role, his family would be killed, which left him feeling forced to stab his best friend. After beginning his sentence, Isaac wrote a letter in which he expressed remorse for the crime he had committed. Some of Anthony's relatives do not believe Isaac's story about intimidation and think that he could have gone to the police, which could have prevented anyone from being harmed, neither his family nor the Dutcher family. Dutcher family feel that the sentences given are too light. They believe Simon and Jonathan should receive the death penalty for the brutal killings of innocent people. Anthony's mother expressed forgiveness towards Isaac and even testified on his behalf during the trial to help lessen his sentence. She thinks that Isaac was manipulated by Simon. After her son's death, she was so heartbroken that she attempted to end her life twice. Despite this, she continues to write letters to Isaac and feels compassion for him. The tragic end of the Dutcher family story is a heartbreaking reminder of human complexity and the consequences of psychological manipulation. The case not only claimed the lives of Anthony, Carl, and Joanna, but it also left deep wounds in the hearts of the family and the community. Although justice was served through the convictions of Isaac, Jonathan, Simon, and Glenn, the Dutcher family's loss remains irreparable. Jennifer's act of forgiveness toward Isaac reflects love and compassion while also raising questions about personal responsibility and the effects of manipulation. Now more than ever, this story draws attention to the need to protect young people from negative influences and reminds us of the value of family and community engagement in preventing similar tragedies. Jessica Edens was born on January 22, 1981, in a small suburb of New York State, USA. She came from a large family, with a sister named Diane and two half-brothers, Nathan and Adam. Jessica spent her early years surrounded by loving parents and siblings, with whom she developed warm relationships. She didn't have outstanding academic success but was always creative, dreaming of becoming a photographer. When her parents recognized this passion, they bought her an amateur camera, which she carried everywhere. She took pictures of people, nature, cities, and architecture, anything that caught her attention. Her work was admired and praised. During her teenage years, Jessica actively pursued this passion and mastered the craft. She began to shoot weddings and various events, initially for free, then for a small fee. This allowed her to earn enough money for her own needs, and the idea of building a real business became increasingly appealing. Jessica's personal life was also progressing. She was sociable, active, attractive, and always attracted a lot of attention. On November 19, 2007, she gave birth to a son named Hayden King. Jessica became pregnant during a rapidly developing relationship with a young man, but the love between them faded quickly, and they broke up before Hayden was born. However, Jessica remained optimistic and maintained friendly relations with the child's biological father, allowing him to communicate with Hayden. Jessica was determined to provide everything her child needed, regardless of whether she had a partner or was raising him as a single mother. Fortunately, she did not have to be alone for long. In 2008, Jessica met a man named Benjamin Edens. They quickly found common ground, grew closer, and within a few meetings, they could not imagine their lives without each other. They was in no hurry to officially register their marriage, as both were creative individuals who understood each other well. After a few months, they moved in together, and Jessica began to contemplate having more children. After a while, they officially got married in 2010. Shortly thereafter, they decided to move to a new large house located in a small, cozy town in Easley, South Carolina, which was ideal for a quiet family life. Their family relationships flourished, and Jessica was convinced she had found the man of her dreams, a feeling that was mutual. 2 years later, on July 19, 2012, they welcomed a daughter named Harper Edens. Jessica believes this further strengthens her relationship with Benjamin. He was a wonderful father who spent all his free time with Harper. He also became so close to Hayden that the boy did not suspect Benjamin was not his biological father. By 2017, Hayden was in the 4th grade, while his younger sister Harper was about to start 1st grade in the fall. This was an exciting milestone. From the outside, Jessica's family appeared perfect. She had 2 children, a beloved job, and a husband whom she described to everyone as the best person. Her eldest child was a good student, and the family expected the same from Harper. Jessica's passion for photography thrived, but when she had her daughter, she decided to take a break and become a housewife, stepping back from her small but successful photo business. However, as Harper grew more independent, Jessica returned to attending various events to conduct professional photography. To simplify her client search, she created a website where she introduced herself as a photographer from Greenville. Jessica described her life as perfect, but, as often happens, things were exaggerated. Behind the facade of love and understanding, difficulties began to arise in the marriage. Over time, Benjamin's feelings cooled, and tension accumulated between them. Jessica wanted to understand what was happening as she began to notice uncharacteristic behaviors in her husband. He would come home from work, immediately run into the shower without even saying hello to his wife and children, as if he were trying to hide something. More and more often, he stayed at work much longer than his shift lasted, citing overtime and global projects that no one could confirm. He began to actively engage in sports, carefully monitored his appearance, and switched to healthy eating. All this could look like ordinary healthy habits that people develop with age, but not with Jessica. She began to suspect Benjamin of cheating. Quickly, a suitable candidate for an affair appeared. A young, attractive woman had recently started at her husband's workplace. This woman's name was Meredith Rahm. She was born on October 29, 1988, in Collierville, Tennessee. In Jessica's opinion, it was on Meredith that her husband had set his eyes. In the early years of Meredith's life, her parents divorced, and her mother quickly found a new man and remarried, so Meredith had a stepfather named Carlton Chambers. He was a worthy person and became like a second father to her. The family in which she grew up was friendly and loving. Meredith had a younger sister named Brittany Rowell. She dedicated herself to her studies from an early age and was focused on career success. She studied well and was creative, like Jessica, but family and children were of little interest to her. In 2009, she graduated from the University of Memphis with a bachelor's degree in international business. After gaining some necessary experience, she moved to Greenville. Meredith was very independent and self-confident, which immediately caught Benjamin's eye. By the time they met, Meredith had started working at the same company as Benjamin. In fact, Jessica's suspicions were justified. Immediately after meeting Meredith, her husband became attracted to her. Their feelings come from both sides. They started dating in secret, and their affair continued for a year. Now, Benjamin finally realized that he wanted to be with his young mistress and wanted to break up with Jessica, but he didn't know how to approach the issue. He was afraid of offending his wife and wanted to avoid the difficulties of the divorce process. For a long time, Benjamin was torn between his family and his mistress. His wife's suspicions only aggravated the situation. The more accusations she made, the more inevitable the breakup felt, which provoked constant quarrels. Jessica did not trust her husband and wanted to find out what was going on. He tried to distance himself, but this could not go on forever. It was time to tell the truth, but Benjamin could not bring himself to do it. Instead of confessing, he decided to move out on far-fetched grounds, citing constant pressure from his wife. On April 11, 2017, Benjamin packed his things and moved from the shared family home to a rented apartment. At least that is what he initially told his wife. Jessica kept hoping that these were only temporary difficulties that many people experience, and that their marriage would be saved. She believed she could convince her husband to return to her and their children. Benjamin tried to avoid the topic of separation altogether, reluctantly answered calls and messages, which only offended her more. The betrayal was of such a magnitude that she could not forgive it. She was angry, and her hopes for a family reunion were shattered. But most of all, she was furious that Benjamin simply ignored her. As the persecution began, Jessica spread various damaging facts about Meredith on all social networks and on any sites where she could post information, exposing her as the homewrecker and her husband as a cheater. Jessica continued to communicate regularly with Benjamin, trying to win him back. Instead, he finally decided to file for divorce. Telling Jessica this provoked even more anger from her, and she now decided to annoy him as much as possible. She knew how much Benjamin loved their daughter Harper, so she sought sole custody of the girl. He had always been a caring father and loved the children, including Hayden. Therefore, he was against such a decision. Benjamin wanted to maintain the right to communicate with the children. He did not want to sit idly by. He hoped to smooth over the conflict and therefore proposed joint custody. Jessica was adamant. Against this backdrop, a serious custody battle began, and tensions escalated. Realizing that it would not be possible to agree amicably, Benjamin went to court on July 11th. He wanted to gain an advantage and testified under oath that Jessica was using the children as a weapon of revenge. By this point, Jessica had completely prevented meetings and communication between the children with their father, not even allowing contact through social networks and mobile phones. Everything was under her total control. Benjamin was afraid she could go too far. Simultaneously, Jessica intensified her harassment of Benjamin and Meredith. She continued to post not just hateful words toward Meredith on social media but also use graphic photos and other offensive captions. Previously, Jessica had tried to portray Benjamin's mistress as a family destroyer. Now, even more disturbing captions began to appear. She claimed that Meredith would get what she deserved, though she never specified what she meant. Meredith, the target of the harassment, began to fear that all of this could be dangerous. However, Benjamin insisted that Jessica had no history of violence, so he believed the situation would gradually settle down. He tried not to provoke her further, but it had little effect. The situation only worsened. When Jessica learned about the filing of a joint custody application by her husband, she was furious. Benjamin had always been a decent person, a valuable employee who earned a good salary and had no bad habits or addictions, so there were no serious grounds for denying him custody or terminating his contact with the children. He simply wanted to see them. Now that he had received the right to visit, which Jessica could not oppose. Due to the impossibility of taking revenge, she began to come up with more sophisticated ways to annoy him. Every short communication with Benjamin ended in conflicts and accusations. It was even more annoying to her that the mistress would be in contact with the children. During this period, Benjamin and Meredith regularly contacted the police to complain about Jessica's behavior. In particular, Meredith could no longer tolerate the publications that Jessica made about her daily on various social networks. She starts having problems at work when Jessica tries to turn things around her. Benjamin tried to prove that Jessica's behavior was stalking and very disturbing. Worse, he began receiving frightening messages from Jessica, all concerning the children. It seemed she was trying to intimidate him with ambiguous phrases, and he worried that his daughter might be in danger. In July 2017, after a court meeting, he called the police to check on the welfare of the children at Jessica's house. He described the situation in detail. He felt powerless since Jessica still interfered with the meetings, and he did not want to use force, fearing she would use this in court against him to strip him of his joint custody rights. The officers who responded reported that everything was fine, but the anxiety from the threats continued to grow. On July 12, they discussed joint custody again. All attempts by Jessica to prevent this were unsuccessful, making her even more furious. During the day, Benjamin begins to receive more disturbing messages from his ex-wife. It was obvious to her that there was no legal way to limit the children's communication with their father, so she tried to irritate him further with her frightening messages. Benjamin contacted the police again and asked the patrol officers to go to the family home to check on the children's well-being. When the officers arrived, they again did not see anything suspicious. The report compiled by the patrolman stated that everything was fine, the family seemed normal, Jessica behaved calmly, and her son and daughter were in a good mood while watching a movie when the officers arrived. At that moment, Jessica insisted that Harper call Benjamin, realizing that he had called the police. All of this became part of her insidious plan to expose him as a liar. While the officer was in the house, he discussed the potential resumption of relations with Benjamin. Jessica denied wanting to reconcile, calling him a traitor who had cheated for a whole year. She couldn't forgive him and intended to use this in court to achieve sole custody of their daughter. She didn't want him in the children's lives. While the officer was filling out the report, Jessica began insisting that Benjamin and Meredith were very dangerous people, especially to the children. She claimed to have suffered from their behavior since the divorce process began and insisted that they were trying to portray her in a bad light. Jessica wanted to obtain a restraining order against them. The patrolman informed Jessica that, in order to get a restraining order, she would have to go through the court process after filing a report. After saying goodbye to the officers, she promised to file a statement in person soon, but that was not destined to happen. The next day, while Jessica's family was out of town, she went to her parents' house early in the morning and took a .40 caliber pistol that they used for self-defense. When relatives heard about this, Jessica warned her father about the need for a weapon, and he was not against it. They did not suspect the scale of the persecution that Jessica had arranged. She skillfully lied, making Benjamin look worse and referring to the persecution from him, that the danger emanating from her ex. Jessica claimed that she could not feel calm at home, she was simply afraid to be left alone with her 2 children. They were easily convinced that Benjamin and Meredith posed a threat, including to the children, and that the weapon would help protect them from what she described as extremely harmful communication. All of this sounded plausible, therefore, her parents had no problem with her needing the weapon for a while. Jessica planned to keep the gun in the house while the divorce process was ongoing. Jessica then sent text messages filled with accusations, now targeting everyone who knew Meredith. She managed to find information about the family and friends of Meredith, copying the messages to everyone, then telling them how Meredith had stolen her husband, destroyed her family, and was now trying to take the children. Jessica obtained the phone numbers of at least 5 friends of family members on social media. It seems she was immersed in this all day, displaying behavior that resembled madness. She even personally called several people, relaying her story over her mobile phone. Some of Jessica's acquaintances became disappointed in her decency, causing real damage to her reputation. Benjamin also received even more terrifying messages. Jessica openly accused and intimidated him, stating that he would not receive anything, he would not gain access to Meredith and the children. Jessica wrote that because of his actions, he would have no chance of getting any of it, as she would not allow him to enjoy life after what he had done. Benjamin was extremely worried about this information and began to send Jessica message after message, trying to understand what she meant. However, she simply ignored all his questions, which only increased Benjamin's anxiety. He expressed his willingness to go to court for an emergency hearing regarding joint custody of the children, even threatened to try to take the children from her if she did not calm down. Finally, Jessica responded with a short message, "Your life will soon be better." Benjamin was sure that she was just mocking him and enjoying this situation. Jessica claimed that it was the last day she would experience pain, after which she ignored any attempts by Benjamin to contact her. On the morning of July 13, 2017, Jessica wrote to Benjamin again. She offered to meet so that Benjamin could answer some questions. However, Benjamin found everything very suspicious and hesitated to attend the meeting. He didn't suspect that this could turn out to be a fatal mistake. Benjamin tried to get her to talk on the phone to understand what she needed and why they couldn't discuss it without a meeting, but this only made Jessica even angrier. At 4:41 p.m., he received another message in which Jessica complained that she was tired of this bullying that never meant anything to Benjamin. In reality, old accusations and the most frightening threats she had ever voiced since the breakup emerged. Jessica's behavior was so alarming that Benjamin contacted her mother to discuss the situation, suspecting that Jessica was having a breakdown. He feared she could not control herself, might pose a danger to herself and the children. At that time, he was at work and could not leave. He did not suspect that while he was talking to Jessica's mother, Jessica was already driving to his apartment with bad intentions. At about 5 p.m., Jessica parked her car near the complex where Benjamin and Meredith lived. In the parking lot, Jessica saw Meredith, who had just returned from work and was sitting in her car, distracted by the mail on her mobile phone. Jessica approached her, pointed a gun, and shot through the glass, instantly killing her rival, whom she considered the cause of all her troubles. All this happened in broad daylight. As people were returning from work, the noise attracted numerous witnesses. After the incident, people saw Jessica get into her car and drive away. Neighbors contacted the police, reporting this and clarifying one frightening detail. At that time, there were 2 children in the car with the shooter. Witnesses described the shooter, and the police understood who they were talking about. They assumed that Benjamin was in danger. Jessica had enough time to act, but she was not going to go to Benjamin's workplace. Instead, she devised something much more sophisticated and stayed one step ahead of law enforcement. While the authorities were still looking for her in the city and were awaiting Benjamin's arrival at work, Jessica called Benjamin, told him that everyone he loved had left and that she would be next. Then Jessica hung up. It was the last call she made. Police eventually traced the call and went to Easley, 7 miles from the Benjamin home, where they saw her Jeep. The doors of the car were locked from the inside, and the engine was still running. Inside, they found 3 bodies, 2 children and Jessica herself, who was 36 years old. Jessica had persistently called Benjamin in hopes of meeting with him, perhaps intending him to be her first victim. However, he seemed to sense danger and avoided contact as much as possible, often opting to respond via a message on a messaging app. When she received a refusal, she flared up in anger and attacked Meredith, after which Jessica returned home. Near her house, she called Benjamin again. After a meaningless conversation, Jessica first attacked her 5-year-old daughter, then her 9-year-old son, after which she turned the gun on herself. Jessica used the same gun that she had borrowed from her parents on July 11th. During the investigation, detectives found out that Benjamin had been trying to obtain a restraining order against Jessica. He had filed for joint custody on the same day and had communicated with the police officer who came to check on the children. Jessica left 4 suicide notes, one for her mother, one for her father, one for her son's father, and one for her husband. In these notes, she expressed her love for her family and her regret for the pain her actions would cause them. Jessica insisted that she could no longer live with these feelings and believed that her children would also suffer without her, so she decided to take not only her life but theirs as well. In the letter to her son's father, she expressed gratitude for giving her her first child and apologized for the pain she had caused. Considering the content of these notes, the police investigated suspicions of domestic violence against the children. Judging by what Jessica wrote, it was possible she had harmed them as a way of exacting revenge on her unfaithful husband. However, nothing like this could be confirmed. As for the last note left by Jessica to Benjamin, it contained several short phrases in which she wished that Benjamin would experience the pain from his cruel act for the rest of his life. The note also stated that he would not be able to hurt them anymore. Among all the individuals involved in this case, Benjamin was the only survivor. The note turned out to be prophetic. Even to this day, he continues to live with the pain of losing his loved ones. On the evening of October 24, 2009, 58-year-old Christy Marks, a successful professional and caring mother, set out from her home filled with hope. She was on her way to reconnect with her daughter, Taylor Marks, who was 20 years old. She had been adopted by Christy years earlier. Earlier that day, Taylor had called Christy, asking her to pick her up from her boyfriend Brian Smith's house. This request was a surprising sign of reconciliation after a difficult period between them. Around 7 p.m., Christy arrived at Brian's house, located in Akron, Ohio, an area known for its high crime rates and general unease. Despite her concerns, Christy parked her car, approached the door, and knocked. Taylor answered. Christy, unable to hide her happiness, embraced her. There was no apparent tension between them. Shortly after, Brian joined them to help escort both women back to Christy's car. To Christy, everything felt normal, even though the neighborhood made her uneasy. As they were heading to the car, the situation turned dire. A man suddenly appeared behind them, wielding a knife. The attack was quick and brutal. Christy was stabbed multiple times in the chest and face before she could defend herself and collapsed on the ground. Taylor screamed, hurried to call emergency services. In the recording of her call, she was heard pleading for help and explaining that her mother had been attacked. While she was on the phone with the dispatcher, Brian took the phone from her. He calmly provided their location and described what happened, stating that the attacker had fled, though his calm demeanor was unsettling given the violent situation. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Christy was alive but in critical condition and was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked hard to save her. Unfortunately, despite their efforts, Christy Marks was pronounced dead shortly after arriving. The main cause of death was the multiple stab wounds inflicted with great force. At the crime scene, law enforcement noticed several discrepancies. Christy's purse, which contained her belongings, cash, keys, and documents, was found untouched near where the attack occurred. This was unusual for a robbery. Additionally, a bloody knife, believed to be the weapon used, was found in nearby bushes. These discoveries raised doubts about the witnesses' accounts and hinted at potential deeper motives for the crime. The police started questioning everyone involved: Taylor, Brian, and Brian's friend, Troy Purdy II, who had been in the house during the attack. Their stories were inconsistent and contradictory. Taylor reported only seeing the silhouette of the attacker, describing someone in red sneakers and a flannel shirt. Brian claimed he tried to intervene and got injured during the struggle with the assailant. while Troy maintained he never left the house and saw nothing. Given their statements, investigators soon suspected that none of them were being truthful. Evidence from the crime scene, such as blood trails and the positioning of the weapon, indicated that the crime was staged. Authorities thought the attack was not random, it appeared to be well planned. During the first night of the investigation, detectives focused on one critical question: why was Christie targeted, and which of the people present knew the truth about what happened? Taylor Marks was born on March 29, 1989. Her biological mother chose to place her into foster care right after her birth, leaving her under the care of the adoption system. Little is known about her biological family, except that Taylor has at least one older sibling, although she was the only one placed in foster care. This marked the start of a new chapter in her life, one that, despite its difficult beginnings, eventually brought her warmth and love. A few months later, Taylor joined the Marks family. Bruce and Christy Marks, a couple who had always dreamed of having a child but were unable to conceive, felt she was destined to be part of their family the moment they first saw her. At that time, the Marks family was financially secure. Bruce worked in a senior role at a major telecommunications company, while Christy efficiently managed their home life and family activities. They had a large, supportive extended family that included grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins who all loved, cared for Taylor. Bruce and Christy were committed to her upbringing, providing her with a high-quality education at prestigious private schools, enrolling her in dance classes, and encouraging her involvement in various extracurricular activities. As a result, Taylor had access to opportunities that many of her peers did not. Taylor had a particularly strong bond with Bruce, who was seen by family friends as her hero, always fulfilling her wishes and offering unwavering support. In contrast, her relationship with Christy was more challenging. Christy was stricter and had higher expectations. While these differing parenting styles did not create major problems during Taylor's early years, tensions began to rise as she entered her teenage years. Christy's increasing oversight and demands led to frequent conflicts between them, causing strain in their relationship. During this time, when Taylor was around 10 years old, Bruce and Christy experienced marital problems, ultimately resulting in their divorce. Taylor reported that her parents' separation had a significant emotional impact on her. She felt that Christy started directing her frustrations towards Taylor, worsening their relationship. A significant turning point in Taylor's life occurred in 2002 when she was only 13 years old. Her father, Bruce, unexpectedly passed away after falling into a diabetic coma. This loss was extremely painful for Taylor, as she not only lost her father but also her main source of emotional support. Shortly after Bruce's death, her grandfather, with whom she was very close, also passed away. These two losses deeply affected Taylor. Following Bruce's death, Christy inherited a large estate, including a considerable amount of money. She decided to use part of this inheritance to buy a new home in Akron, Ohio, hoping that a change of environment would help them start anew. However, despite this move, Taylor's emotional well-being worsened. She became more isolated, struggled academically, and had increasing conflicts with Christy. Christy wanted to support her daughter, but her approach often felt too controlling. To make up for the loss of Bruce, she tried to provide Taylor with material comforts, going out of her way to give her everything she wanted and more. Despite this, their emotional bond continued to weaken. Christy wished for Taylor to take responsibility, complete her education, and eventually continue the family legacy. However, Taylor was uninterested in these plans, instead dreaming of breaking free from what she perceived as imposed expectations. As Taylor entered her teenage years, her desire for independence conflicted with her mother's expectations, leading to increasing arguments that intensified over time. Taylor saw her mother as a constant source of pressure, and tensions rose each year. Concerned about her daughter's falling grades, Taylor's lack of focus in school, and apparent disregard for her future, Christy attempted to enforce strict rules to guide Taylor in what she believed was the right path. Taylor perceived her mother's actions as a way to control her life, which made her want to rebel even more. Christy's constant comments about Taylor's looks, clothing choices, and friends further strained their relationship. High school was especially tough for Taylor. Even with the privileges her mother provided, she started using them carelessly. Rather than concentrating on her studies, she chose to hang out with friends, ignoring Christie's efforts to keep her disciplined. Although Christie tried different approaches to guide her daughter, these attempts only pushed them further apart. In 2008, Taylor graduated from high school. A significant turning point occurred. Although Christie offered financial support and opportunities for Taylor to attend any college, Taylor was not interested in furthering her education. Christie encouraged her to at least give it a try, which led Taylor to enroll at a university in Akron. However, just a month into her first semester, she decided to drop out. This choice was devastating for Christie, highlighting the growing divide between their visions for Taylor's future. When persuasion failed, Christie opted for a more direct approach. She presented Taylor with an ultimatum: either find the job and support herself or move out of the house. This expectation aligned with American cultural norms, where young adults are urged to take responsibility for their lives as they reach adulthood. Unfortunately, Taylor interpreted her mother's words as harsh and threatening, escalating the conflict between them. The situation worsened in May 2009 when Taylor met Brian Smith, a 21-year-old known for his rebellious nature. Brian lived with his mother and sister in a low-income neighborhood. Taylor was attracted to him, viewing him as a way to break free from her mother's control. People who knew Brian warned that he had a bad temper and needed to dominate his relationships, but Taylor had no change of mind. Christie disapproved of the relationship, worried about Brian's behavior and its potential impact on her daughter. She tried to stop Taylor from seeing him and even forbade him from visiting their home, but this only made Taylor more determined to pursue the relationship. Soon after, Taylor moved in with Brian, leaving her mother's house behind. However, life with Brian was not as she had hoped. Initially, their relationship appeared promising, but it quickly became evident that Brian was controlling and aggressive. Taylor dealt with jealousy, control, and frequent bursts of anger from him. Even so, she refused to return home, seeing it as a sign of weakness. Concerned for Taylor's well-being, Christie continued to support her by providing essential items and staying in touch, hoping that Taylor would come to realize her mistakes. The tension between Christie and Taylor reached a peak when Christie offered Taylor a chance to return home. She could come back if she either continued her education or found a job. To help her, Christie also offered to provide a car, an apartment, and a job at her company. However, Taylor showed little interest in these options. Despite the challenges, her tumultuous relationship with Brian continued. Christie hoped that, in time, Taylor would realize her mistakes and return home to take on more responsibilities. Sadly, this hope would never materialize. As the years passed, the rift in their relationship widened, leading to a tragic outcome. When Taylor moved in with Brian, she thought she was gaining the freedom she had long desired. However, this freedom quickly turned into a series of restrictions. Life with Brian was very different from what she had expected. He enforced strict rules and scrutinized every aspect of her life. Taylor, who was used to a certain degree of comfort and independence, found herself in a situation where she had to obey Brian's demands. Brian's control over Taylor grew increasingly extreme. He frequently checked her phone, read her text messages, and closely monitored where she went. Even her conversations with Christie became a source of conflict. Brian persuaded Taylor that her mother was trying to manipulate her and limit her independence. His influence intensified the rift between Taylor and Christie, who kept trying to stay in touch and maintain their communication. In Brian's home, Taylor felt completely isolated. He not only limited her social interactions but also manipulated her emotions, making her believe he was the only one who truly understood her. During arguments, Brian exhibited aggressive behavior, breaking things and making threats. After these outbursts, he demanded her total loyalty and constantly reminded her of how much she depended on him. The situation was made worse by Brian's family. His mother, Tammy, chose not to intervene, effectively supporting Brian's behavior. His younger sister also contributed to controlling Taylor by watching her closely when Brian was not around, creating an environment where Taylor's every action was monitored. Taylor's financial ties to her mother were another significant issue in her relationship with Brian. Knowing about Christie's wealth and Taylor's potential inheritance, Brian was determined to keep control over her. He often blamed her mother for her problems, driving a wedge between them. Under Brian's influence, Taylor started avoiding her mother. Even when Christie came to help her daughter, Brian stayed distant and dismissive, discouraging Taylor from accepting her mother's support, insisting they could manage on their own. Despite Brian's efforts, Christie continued to care for Taylor, providing her with necessities and encouraging her to return home. By the summer of 2009, the tension between Taylor, Brian, and Christie had intensified. After months of living with Brian, Taylor had become completely reliant on him. As Brian's control grew and his aggression escalated, a new plan emerged, something that initially felt unlikely but quickly became more tangible. This idea was driven by increasing pressure, shared dissatisfaction, and financial motivations. The plan was to eliminate Christie permanently, which would give them access to her assets. For Taylor, this was a way to cut her last connections to her mother and achieve financial independence. For Brian, it was a chance to secure his control over Taylor and use her inheritance to improve his own situation. The idea of committing a crime started to spread among their close friends. Brian's 19-year-old friend, Troy Purdy, who often visited their home, joined these discussions. Being younger and impressionable, Troy was seen as the perfect choice for the plan. What began as jokes or hypothetical situations eventually grew more serious. The planning took place gradually, with careful attention to detail. Brian and Taylor discussed how to make the crime appear as if it were a robbery or a random attack. They decided that any evidence left at the scene should suggest spontaneous violence rather than a planned crime. Troy was selected to carry out the act to keep Brian and Taylor from being directly linked to it. Troy agreed to participate because of his loyalty to Brian and didn't question the plan when asked. In return for his involvement, Troy was promised $5,000, which Taylor expected to come from her inheritance once the legal matters were settled. They paid special attention to choosing a weapon. Taylor mentioned that Brian's mother, Tammy, even bought a knife for the plan, but it was later rejected due to its size and weight. Eventually, Troy was tasked with finding a suitable weapon. He chose a lightweight knife that was easy to hide and carry. A crucial part of their preparation was observing Christie's habits. They knew Christie frequently visited Brian's house to see Taylor, making her an easy target since she usually came alone under the pretense of picking up her daughter. This detail was included in their plan. They envisioned Christie arriving at the house, and the attack happening as she was leaving or near her car. Just before the plan was implemented, Taylor took a crucial step to ensure everything would go smoothly. She called her mother and asked for a ride home, implying she wanted to return. This call was intended to put Christie at ease, making her less suspicious about Taylor's true intentions. Throughout their discussions, Taylor appeared confident and committed. According to Troy, she was not just involved in planning but was also determined to follow through. Although her relationship with her mother was strained, taking such a significant action was a big deal. Taylor explained her involvement by referring to years of resentment and a strong desire to break free from her mother's control. Meanwhile, Brian kept the process on track, persuading Taylor that this was the only way to solve her issues. By the evening of October 24, 2009, everything was in place. Taylor was aware that the plan was shifting from theory to action. Taylor remained calm and focused, convinced this was the best way forward for them. For Taylor and Brian, it represented the start of a new chapter in their lives. That day began as an ordinary day for Christie Marks but ended in tragedy. That evening, Taylor called her mother to say she wanted to come home. For Christie, this unexpected phone call brought joy after months of tension. She viewed it as a chance to reconnect with her daughter. Christie quickly packed her things, got in her car, and drove to Brian's house, unaware that she was heading into a carefully orchestrated crime. Christie arrived at around 7 p.m. and parked her car near the house. She walked to the front door, where Taylor welcomed her with a smile and a hug, signaling a potential reconciliation. Brian watched from a distance as they interacted, while Troy stayed inside to avoid raising any suspicion. As Christie and Taylor walked toward the car, with Brian following closely behind, everything seemed normal. However, everything changed when they reached the car. Troy suddenly emerged from the house with a knife and attacked Christy. She had no time to react as Troy stabbed her multiple times in the chest and face. The assault was quick and brutal, leaving Christy unable to defend herself. She collapsed to the ground with over 10 stab wounds. This was not a robbery, it was a targeted attack intended to kill her. Taylor stood nearby, observing the attack unfold. Later, she claimed she didn't intervene because she was scared of Troy, but surveillance footage revealed that she showed no signs of panic or distress. Brian also did not intervene, insisting that his role was to protect the women, yet he took no action to stop Troy. After the attack, Taylor called emergency services, her voice tense as she urgently requested an ambulance. Brian then took over the call, acting as the coordinator. He calmly provided the dispatcher with details about their location and the type of assistance required. His unemotional tone raised suspicions among law enforcement officials who later listened to the call. Troy, the attacker, discarded the knife in a nearby bush and fled the scene. He later claimed that he had acted out of emotional distress, but evidence suggested his actions were premeditated. Following Christy Marks's tragic death, the investigation started right away. Police arrived at the scene within minutes of the emergency call. They found evidence that raised immediate doubts: a knife hidden in the bushes, Christy's purse untouched with all her belongings, and no signs of robbery. These details did not support the theory of a random attack. Investigators began by interviewing the main individuals involved: Taylor, Brian, and Troy. They were interviewed separately to avoid any possibility of collaboration. However, their stories did not match and raised suspicions as the police noticed inconsistencies in their statements. The crucial evidence was obtained from surveillance footage near the crime scene. The video showed Taylor and Brian standing close by while Troy attacked Christy. Neither of them attempted to stop the assault. This footage became a pivotal element in the investigation. With this evidence, detectives brought the suspects back for additional questioning. Under the strain of the evidence presented, Troy was the first to confess. He stated that the attack was planned in advance, claimed that Taylor had orchestrated the scheme. Troy explained that she had approached him and Brian with the plan, assuring them of a financial reward from her expected inheritance after her mother's death. Troy admitted that his role was to carry out the attack while Brian was tasked with creating an alibi by making it look like a robbery. He also confessed to intentionally injuring Brian to strengthen the staged scenario's credibility. His admission completely contradicted Taylor's earlier assertion that the attack was random. When Brian heard about Troy's confession, he changed his story as well. He supported Troy's claim that Taylor had come up with the plan but denied being actively involved. Brian stated that while he didn't agree with the attack, he felt he couldn't stop Taylor and Troy. He also claimed he didn't know the full details of the plan until the last moment, which appeared to minimize his involvement. Faced with growing evidence and accusations, Taylor initially denied her participation. However, her account became more inconsistent over time. Investigators observed that she started contradicting herself, and her behavior indicated she was trying to conceal the truth. Eventually, under the pressure of the evidence, Taylor admitted to discussing the plan with Brian and Troy. The investigation revealed that the crime was carefully planned, with every detail considered, from selecting the weapon to staging fake injuries. The financial motive mentioned by both Troy and Brian became a key focus for the prosecution. Taylor confessed that her ongoing conflict with her mother influenced her decision, but she maintained that she didn't expect the situation to end in tragedy. The police quickly understood what had occurred. Taylor Marks, Brian Smith, and Troy Purdy were arrested and charged in connection with Christy Marks's death. While this marked the end of the initial investigation phase, the legal proceedings were just beginning. The court would assess their levels of responsibility and determine their sentences. The trial for Christy Marks's case started in late 2009. The defendants faced intense public attention due to the violent nature of the crime and their connections to the victim. The prosecution presented a strong case supported by extensive evidence, witness testimonies, and video recordings. A key piece of evidence was the surveillance footage showing Taylor and Brian standing by without attempting to intervene during the attack on Christy. Moreover, Troy's confession, which detailed the conspiracy and his involvement in the crime, played a crucial role in the case. Investigators shared text messages from Taylor's phone where she discussed her troubled relationship with her mother and her wish to be independent. They also uncovered evidence of a financial motive, noting that Taylor was set to inherit a significant sum after Christie's death. Christie possessed considerable assets, including real estate, a business, and savings. Defense attorneys for Taylor, Brian, and Troy tried to argue that their clients were not fully responsible for the crime. Taylor's lawyer insisted that she was heavily influenced by Brian and lacked the ability to act on her own. He attributed her vulnerability to the emotional turmoil following her father's death and the pressure from her mother. Brian claimed he had no direct role in the crime, with his lawyer stating he was shocked and unaware of the plan until it unfolded, preventing him from intervening. Meanwhile, Troy, who initially confessed, tried to alter his story during the trial, asserting that he acted under Brian's coercion. During the proceedings, Troy accepted a plea deal to admit his guilt and testify against the others, resulting in a life sentence without parole, which spared him from the death penalty. Realizing her situation was dire, Taylor also pleaded guilty during the hearings. She gave a heartfelt statement where she expressed regret for her actions, explaining that her conflicts with her mother and the influence of Brian led her to take part in the crime. However, the prosecutors insisted that her involvement was intentional and well-planned. Brian, on the other hand, initially claimed he was not guilty but later acknowledged his role when presented with undeniable evidence. He argued that his participation was minor and that he never meant for the crime to happen, but the court saw this as an effort to minimize his accountability. In 2010, the court issued its verdicts. Taylor Marks and Brian Smith were convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy, resulting in life sentences without the possibility of parole. Although Taylor expressed remorse, her statement about losing control was viewed as an attempt to reduce her sentence. Troy, under the terms of his plea deal, also received a life sentence. However, his subsequent behavior in prison became concerning when he was charged in 2015 for possessing a weapon, which raised concerns about his ability to rehabilitate. The sentencing had a profound impact on everyone involved in the tragedy. This situation serves as a stark reminder of how personal conflicts and impulsive choices can ruin even the strongest bonds. Taylor then was relocated to a women's correctional facility in Ohio. Throughout her early years in prison, she remained isolated, choosing to avoid interaction with the media and other inmates. In 2021, Taylor participated in a television interview regarding her case. During the interview, she acknowledged that her actions were serious but continued to justify them by discussing her conflicts with her mother and her emotional struggles. Although she had previously expressed remorse in court, Taylor reiterated her criticisms of her mother, calling her strict and unsupportive after her father's death. She also expressed a desire for her case to be reviewed, hoping for a chance at freedom. These statements caused controversy, with many perceiving them as indications of insincerity. Currently, Taylor spends her time involved in rehabilitation programs and working within the prison. Some view her as manipulative and insincere, while others believe she is seeking meaning in her life while incarcerated. Meanwhile, Brian, who is also serving a life sentence in a high-security prison, has kept a low profile since his conviction. He has avoided media interviews and has not publicly addressed his involvement in the crime. Prison staff describe Brian as a difficult inmate who often engages in conflicts and displays aggression. His name came up again in 2017 when reports revealed he had gotten into a fight with another inmate. This incident highlighted that his aggressive behavior had not improved since his sentencing. Like Taylor, Brian symbolizes the tragic inability to accept responsibility and the harmful impact one person can have on others. Troy, who played a direct role in the crime, was also sent to a maximum security prison. Even though he received a plea deal, his conduct in prison showed he hadn't changed. Since the incident, Troy has seldom been covered in the media. While some viewed his involvement in the crime as a result of being manipulated by Brian and Taylor, his readiness to carry out the fatal attacks raised concerns about his potential for rehabilitation. The memory of Christie Marks endures among her friends and surviving family. Her senior care business was sold after her death, with part of the proceeds going to charities that support victims of domestic violence. Christy is often remembered by her loved ones as a strong and compassionate woman who devoted her life to helping others. Years after Christy's passing, her story remains a warning about the need for open communication in families and the value of seeking professional help when conflicts escalate.